Don't know much about history, don't know much biology, don't know much about a science book, don't know much about the French I took, but I do know that I love you, and I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world it could be. Don't know much about geography, don't know much trigonometry, don't know much about algebra, don't know what a slide rule is for, but I do know that 1 and 1 is 2. And if this one could be with you, what a wonderful world it could be. Now I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be. For maybe by being an A student, baby, I can win your love for me, yeah. Don't know much about history, don't know much biology, don't know much about a science book, don't know much about the French I took, but I do know that I love you, and I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world it'll be with me, with me. What a wonderful world, what a wonderful world. What a wonderful world.
Just imagine we woke up in paradise. Don't need magic. Let my thoughts just carry us home, home tonight. Future's golden. Don't let go. Don't give it up. Just keep holding. Even when you've had enough, I will be your light. When you're low, I'll lead you home, chariot. Take you back to where you're from, chariot. One step forward on the road ahead of us. Don't look back, no. You just need a bit of luck. Oh, oh, tonight. When you're low, I'll lead you home, chariot.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, alumni and friends, it's a pleasure to invite you to Scarisbrick Hall. But more importantly, it's a pleasure to invite you to the Oak Theatre, a place that was built for the daydreamer and the creative storyteller. Today is much more than a gathering. It's an event about bridging generations. But more importantly, a celebration about a book, a story, a legacy. But first of all, my name is Raymond Charles Pelakamoyo. You may call me Ray Charles or Usher Raymond, depending on what generation you are from. But before I carry on, can we just give one more round of applause to our sixth form dancers for that amazing dance? Bella and Anna just took you through a dance that was titled Chariot, a dance about the students' first day at Scarisbrick Hall. I have read and I have seen the many stories from the alumni about their first day there, about the drive down the long pine road, to the last hug before they became a boarder, to the very heavy bags they used to carry. I have read them all. It's an ode to the dedication, the sacrifice, and the salvation of what it takes to be a Scarisbrick Hall student. I run the Alumni and Development Office, and what I need to do is bring you guys together and bridge the generations again. Later on during this event, I'll be inviting to the stage our esteemed facilitator of the evening, Lord Dr. Michael Hastings, Baron of Scarisbrick, a man that has lived his life on the service of others, but more importantly, somebody that remembered the values that were instilled in him by Charles Oxley, our founder of this great school. Funny enough, 12 years ago, I actually met Lord Michael. He doesn't know this, I think. I don't know. Do you? No. We met in Bangkok at One Young World. He spoke passionately about the service of helping others. Then I understood what the true meaning was to live a life of purpose. Later, he'll be joined on stage by the author of this book and also a former headmaster. Then he'll also be joined by a current headmaster and also an alumnus of this school. But before we get there, I just want to tell you guys a story about my first day at Scarisbrick Hall School. I work here, but I remember arriving here and walking up the Pine Road. And I remember opening the great oak doors and being engulfed in the magnitude of the secrets and history that was engraved into this wall. And I kept hearing Pugin, and I was overwhelmed. And I remember listening to my grandfather when he was a charge d'affaires or ambassador to Washington, D.C. during President Ford's era. He said, Raymond, when I felt overwhelmed at the White House, I hid. I hid in the library, in the archives room. So what I did is I hid in the Scarisbrick Hall Library. That is where I met a woman, also an alumni of the school. Her name was Jacqueline Ashcroft. We spoke and she gave me a white book with blue writing and she said, read this. I looked at it and it said Standard Bearer by David Raynor. I scrolled through the book and in 2 weeks I'd finished the book and I thought to myself, wow, I finally understand the values and what it truly means to be at this school. And right then I knew my North Star was to build a community. Ladies and gentlemen, this event is not for us, it's for you. We're here to take you through a journey through time. Call it a time capsule. This is what we're here for today. So ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and absolute privilege to say thank you to the Headley family for their transparency and their guided knowledge. I want to say thank you to Rachel Oxley for her wisdom and meticulous attention to detail to making sure her family's story is told right. I want to say thank you to David Raynor for having the courage and bravery to keep writing. I, an author, understand how hard it is to lay your truth on paper and then wait for the whole world to have an opinion. For that, I say thank you. I also want to say thank you to you guys, the guests. Without you, this event would never have happened. So thank you for taking the leap and putting one leg before the other. Thank you for coming back to school and bringing your guests. And for those that have never been here before, welcome. I also want to say thank you, and finally, to those that donated to the Mike Headley Scholarship and Bursary Fund. We live in unprecedented times, and children don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. With your help, it makes the uphill battle a little bit easier, knowing that there's a guardian angel supporting them all the way up. And ladies and gentlemen, it's the moment for the main event, and I wish to invite to the stage Lord Dr. Michael Hastings. Oh, yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're as delighted to be here as I am. And it's been a long journey to come here today. London is far away, but coming home is always beautiful. And it feels like that for me. I was here in the years 1972 to 1976, and I know looking around you all remember those years. It's not an imposition. But in my first week here, a highly impertinent man sitting right there, called John Sutton Smith, pointed at me in a Bible study group and said these words. You remember them well, John. He said, "Boy," which I thought, well, there you go. He got that bit right. And he goes, "Boy, the devil lives in your duvet." Do you remember that, John? John was the head of English. And what he wanted to say to me and to my brother Daniel and to everybody else who was in that room at that time is your life depends on how you use your time, what you do with it, and whether or not you bring value from the seconds and moments you've got or you waste them. This morning, I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And John, my grandson Tambo over here, he too gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I've taught all the kids and the family to get up at 5 because of you. And that was the first week here at Scarisbrick Hall, 1972. And I learnt the value of 5 o'clock rising because all of a sudden you discover, when you've taken that across 6 days of the week, allowing one day to give you a tiny bit longer, but not a lot, but across 6 days of the week, you then have an 8-day week. And that's wonderful. And then people say to me, "How do you do all the things you do?" I say, "It's very easy. I have an 8-day week." Because you realize the time that God has given you where you can make wonderful things happen. I want to begin some remarks with paying tribute to David for enduring 7 years of writing a book. It's a hard thing to write a book. I wrote a book way back in the 1980s, which thankfully is long buried. But I have one copy at home, and there's one in the British Library. It's called Addiction, and it was about heroin addiction. I wasn't a heroin addict, by the way, don't stop panicking. But I wrote a book because I was working with heroin addicts, and I came to understand the pressures and realities of their lives. But David, for 7 years, you labored to put this text together, which is absolutely full of richness and stories and erudite thinking. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And the Headley family, who are here, who've continued this great tradition of supporting Scarisbrick Hall School, returning it back into Scarisbrick Hall School, investing so much in restoring facilities but building new ones. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you. And I heard Raymond mention Rachel Oxley. Is Rachel here? Is she here? No? Well, I will talk a lot about dear Charles Oxley, who to me was a phenomenal personal mentor and great head teacher. Had a massive appreciation of respect and love for him. I'll tell you what he did for me personally. 2 things. My coming to Scarisbrick Hall School, beginning of September 1972, had followed just a few days earlier, 28th of August 1972, at 2:30 in the afternoon, where my dear older brother, who is also an alumni of the school and was here in the summer last year, had helped me to pray to make a commitment to Jesus Christ in my life. And that decision, 2:30 in the afternoon on the 28th of August 1972, was the pivotal turning decision of my life. And I came here 2 days later and met John. And as I grew into the next level, into being 15 and 16, I would always admire the way Charles Oxley, those of us who were pupils will remember, and you'll remember, he always used to stand like this, you know? Put his hands in, stood like this. And he had that sort of upright and overwhelming sense that he was almost like an icon. And he was so tall, he's so big. And of course, the older you get, you realize he's actually, well, he was tall, but I remember him saying to me one day when I was 15, unlike John, who was just rude and called me boy, Charles, as a headmaster, said, Michael, I know you want to know more about the Bible. If you'd like help, I'll read it with you. Wasn't that amazing? So every other weekend when Charles Oxley would be here and his wife Muriel was elsewhere at Tower College, where I also went in our younger days before, as a family, we moved to the Caribbean and then came back. Every other Saturday, I would go to his office after dinner, knock on the door, he'd let me in, I'd sit on the other side of the big table, and we'd read the Bible together for an hour and a half. And for me as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, that was phenomenal. That was phenomenal. I really deeply, deeply appreciated his time and his effort and his willingness. He did something else for me, which was having left the school, and of course most kids when they leave school want to forget it. I didn't want to forget it. In fact, I think I even told John this. I dreamt many times, I was telling Tambo on the way up here in the car, I dreamt many times about coming back here as a school teacher, thinking that would be my dream. I did end up as a school teacher, true, but because of Charles Oxley, something happened. So I went to theological college, as pointed out in David's book, got a rather rum degree, reflecting my limited number of brain cells. I got a 2-2 in theology. And of course, everyone around me at the time said, well, you're going to be a missionary beggar for the rest of your life, and you'll never... I thought, bring it on. Let's have a fight. But I'd been through college, got my rum degree, was just starting teacher training college, and Charles Oxley sent me a letter. And the letter said, Michael, would you, on my behalf, go to a meeting in London, in Hanover Square, just behind the Oval Tube Station, and will you attend this meeting, take some notes, and send me the notes? Oh, of course. I did, because I had such affectionate support for him, and I understood his mission, and we were living that mission here in the school. So I went along. I was a little bit late, John, by about 5 minutes. The meeting had already started. I was the youngest person there by far, I think by decades, to be perfectly honest. And I looked around the room, and of course, everybody else was elderly and of a different skin tone to me. I looked around the room, and I thought, oh, well, I think I stand out here somewhat. But I said hello to the chairman of the meeting, who was a man called Hartley Booth. And we said one hello. 6 years later, because of Charles Oxley's request, because of saying hello, 6 years later, he's working for Margaret Thatcher in 10 Downing Street. I didn't know that. And he phones me up. And he says, do you remember me? In fact, I remember him saying, because in those days the telephone was on the wall. You remember that? I know the young people can't relate to that. What, mobiles on the wall? Why did you put them there? But it was on the wall. And I remember taking the phone from the wall, and I was a teacher, and I was preparing lessons and marking books. And he says, is that Michael? I said, yes, it is. Who's this? He says, Hartley here. So I said, because he's very posh. So I said, oh, Hartley. He goes, Hartley Booth. Do you remember Hartley Booth? 6 years ago, we met. You came to the Hanover Square, and 6 years ago, we had a brief conversation. I said, yeah, I think we said hello. He goes, yes. And he said, I'm in Downing Street. I said, oh, I didn't know there was a phone box in Downing Street. And he said, no, I'm inside. I'm with her. She's right here. I went, what, the Prime Minister? Yes, she's right here. I could hear cackling away. I said, oh, how can I help? I'm thinking my marking or my teaching has been really bad. That it's got that far. And he said, well, you remember, there have been very difficult urban riots, 1981, 1985. These have been mainly urban riots, mainly black communities, people unemployed, distressed, feeling a real sense of loss, no prospects, and blaming the government. And we are told by the security intelligence system it's all going to happen again in 1986. And this was February 1986. And he said, can I tell you what happened in the cabinet room? I said, go on. So he said, the Prime Minister gathered all of her cabinet and all of her advisors, and the advisors are standing at the back. And she said, I'm going to use her voice, because I did meet her many times as I picked up her voice. And she said, does anybody here know anybody black who can help us? We need help. They're going to burn the place down. Anybody have any help? So Hartley said, I know someone. And that was me. And that's all because of Charles Oxley saying, would you go and take some notes? So I ended up working for Margaret Thatcher as a non-conservative, I have to say. If you've researched me at all, but please don't bother, you'll realize that I'm an independent member of the House of Lords, a non-political crossbench, which people say, what is a crossbencher? I say, we're angry with all the rest. So we're neither Conservative, Labour, Liberal, or whatever. And all that transformation in my life, which started off because I did a simple thing, that because of my affection for Charles Oxley, who was a phenomenal leader for this great school, for what the culture here represented, what John taught me about timekeeping, and Julie, such a gracious, always kind, welcoming, motherly figure, the best mother and grump in the world. Because of what I learnt here, I was able to apply that across generations. So I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful to David for writing his book, which we will talk about shortly. One of the other things that I learnt here, and Tambo will affirm that this is true, is that I learnt to be constantly grateful. Because every morning we could step out by a lake or round some bushes and walk forestry and breathe air. And there used to be, I don't know if there are still, Jeff, swans on the lake. Swans on the lake, and I remember, I did fall into the lake once. Because I wasn't paying attention. It wasn't listening to a phone because we didn't have them. But I was chatting to someone. I literally just walked straight into it. But there we go. It is what it was. But here we had an atmosphere that was rich with opportunity. And we learnt the value. I mean, John and Julie were missionaries in Zambia, and we learnt the value of thinking about the world beyond ourselves, understanding our privilege and putting that privilege into perspective. And every day walking around, thinking, singing sometimes, praying, reflecting, being grateful. I'm very conscious of that gratitude. At the time, being here, and this has become the mantra of my life, my very best friend then, Michael Sargent, who you'll remember, who's a big figure at ITV now, and that's wonderful. But Michael asked me, we were walking one early morning around the bushes, and Michael asked me, what do you want to do with your life? And I was 16 at the time. Now, I know it's not a regular 16-year-old question, but I think it should be. And I had this phrase that popped out, which was, I want to speak up for the poor. And I want to bend the power of the prosperous to the potential of the poor. Speak up for the poor. bend the power of the prosperous to the potential of the poor. I remember Michael asking me, what does that mean? And I said, well, the first bit's clear. I've got to speak on behalf of those who have no voice, who the world disregards or disrespects. I need to speak up for them. And I had lived through a lot of that in our Jamaica years, where I'd witnessed savage street violence because of the breakdown of the culture and the economy. And I'd watched people, thinking of recent context in Southport, I'd watched people violently attack each other. And that was in the early 1970s. And that's the reason why our parents sent my brother and I away, because the place was in meltdown and we were too close to the extreme violence and tension. So we came here. So I knew I needed to speak up for the poor, but then I had to learn, what does it mean to bend the power of the prosperous? And I figured out, that means I need to get to know lots of prosperous people. I need to be in places where there's wealth and resource. So how am I going to do that? Well, that's not up to me. That was up to God. And the trajectory of life has been all about that. So when the Queen was kind enough to offer me a peerage to the House of Lords, by the way, I was offered by the Conservatives. Geoffrey Archer was chairman of the Conservative Party at the time, and he said, we'd like to give you a peerage. I said, no, thank you, Geoffrey, I'm not a Conservative. You can keep it, but you're a great friend. So I said no. And Tony Blair then offered me, and I said no, because I wasn't a Labour member and I didn't want to. Anyway. And then Paddy Ashdown, Liberal, offered me, and I said no. And so I just kind of thought, well, I'll just wait. But who's next? I don't want to be a Green. Never mind, sorry. But although the Greens are very important. What happened was the Blair government had set up the Independent Appointments Commission. And thankfully they came to me. But when the Queen, when you get offered a peerage, you get sent this very hefty document, and you have to go and see a person called the Garter King of Arms, whose office goes back to the 11th century. And you go to this glamorous building, which is sort of in the city of London. And there is the Garter King of Arms, up some creaky stairs. You get to the top, and he's looking down cut glasses like this, just like John has on here. And he says, which bit of Her Majesty's domain do you wish to possess? Because you have to be of somewhere, because we're not hereditary. And I said, Scarisbrick. He said, why Scarisbrick? He said, there used to be a Lord of Scarisbrick. I said, I know there used to be a Lord, but that was way before. Why Scarisbrick? I said, because I went to a school there that fashioned my heart, framed my soul, trained my mind, and gave me the opportunity to have respect and dignity. So that is why I took on the title of Scarisbrick. Because of here. Because of the investment of David and of the great Charles Oxley, and of the families who cared so deeply about what they nurtured in us as young men and young women. It mattered enormously. My life now, I go to the Palace of Westminster virtually every day, and it looks like that. So I've not quite escaped it. Well, I don't go every day. I probably do about 2 days a week. Most of my life now is consumed with prisoners, and spend a lot of time in prisons up and down the country, mainly in the south. I was in a prison on Wednesday morning, in the Palace of Westminster on Thursday morning. I'll be in the Palace of Westminster on Monday and in a prison on Tuesday next week. That's the way it goes. And I realize that in speaking up for people who often have been misjudged, wrongly judged, I'm speaking up for the poor and standing with them. I can smell the difference between someone who's been wrongly convicted and someone who hasn't. I've been around this for 40 years. Raymond forgot to mention my CBE, but that's okay. But I was given a CBE for my years leading crime concern and leading alternatives to custody. And I continue on this journey of fighting for justice. So Thursday morning we had a painful debate about the post office scandal compensation scheme. And I raised extensively over a 10-minute speech the fact that there were 986 prosecutions of postmasters, 986 in every corner of England, Scotland and Wales. Do you know not one judge questioned? Not one judge questioned. They just swallowed what the post office told them. And what the Crown Prosecution Service said. No judge threw a single case out. We're having a difficult conversation in Parliament right now about the independence of the judiciary. And I think after this post office scandal, I'm inclined towards more direction. It's not an easy thing. You change great institutions that have stood for a long time. But when you see how deep that miscarriage of justice was on people who, many of whom ended up committing suicide, many went to prison, over 200 went to prison, their lives were lost in the course of deceit. We need to have better values and do things in our institutions that reflect that. So I'm just going to give you, as we come to a quick close, as I do, before we move on to the next part of our conversation, I wanted to read you, because this is a great school, and many of us who are here were at school together, and I've kept this for a very, very long time. Besides the fact that my habit of getting up at 5 in the morning, which is all your fault, John, I have another habit, which is my mother made me always carry a handkerchief. And I used to say to, before I understood, I'd say, Mother, why do I always have a handkerchief? She says, in case you have a runny nose, but if you don't have one, somebody else has one, you give it to them. So that was the important thing I learned. But I also learned, while I was here, to think about what growing up is all about. And I'll just finish with this before I introduce David and Jeff. It's called If I Had My Child to Raise Over Again. So have a think about this, all of you who have had your children. If I had my child to raise all over again, I'd build self-esteem first and the house later. I'd finger paint more and I'd point the finger less. I'd do less correcting and more connecting. I'd take my eyes off my watch and watch with my eyes. I'd care to know less and know to care more. I'd take more hikes and fly more kites. I'd stop playing serious and seriously play. I'd run through more fields and gaze at more stars. I'd do more hugging and less tugging. I'd see the oak tree in the acorn more often. I'd be firm less often and affirm more often. I'd model less about the love of power and more about the power of love. Thank you, Scarisbrick. So let me introduce David Raynor, the man of the moment. Thank you. And Jeff Shaw, the man of the future. I know somebody will come and whip away the tape. Oh, thank you. You're very kind. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is your school. We're in your home.
Some may say that, of course, the family here, the directors as well, very much their home. But as a head, you do feel as though it is kind of your school. And if you don't, I think you don't quite feel attached to it. I'm sure David felt the same way. You feel personal about it. And you can't shake that. It stays with you.
Yes.
David, just talk to us a little bit about the 7 years of writing. Why so long?
Well, I had the thought of possibly doing a history of the school when I'd left in '98, but I wrote other things in between. And then I was here one day and was talking with Jeff and Mike Headley in the Great Hall, and they were talking about the possibility of a history of the school, and they asked if I would be interested. And it was very much on my heart to do it, so I immediately said yes. And then I did all the research. Rachel Oxley kindly invited me over with my wife to afternoon tea.
Very good.
And allowed me to record an interview with her to get a lot of background, particularly of her father and mother. And then I wrote a first draft, which I sent to Rachel, and she put me right on quite a number of things. Sent it back. The Headley family were in the process of building, development, and restoration. And they said at one point, could we just hold the book while we finish these projects? And this being the principal one, I presume they had in mind. And I was quite happy just to leave it on the file, as it were, for a while. And then along came COVID, which pushed things back even further. And since COVID, it's been a slow process of getting it all finalized, and that we agreed that we would aim towards this particular year, being the 60th anniversary of the school. It seemed very appropriate to try and get the book published during this year. So here we are.
You know, filmmakers always say there's more left on the cutting floor than there is in the film. And what did you throw on the floor that you didn't put in the book because you either thought it was too scandalous or just uninteresting? What do we need to know, David?
Well, I was very fortunate. I'd written Charles's biography, The Standard Bearer, 25 years ago now.
It's a good book.
And
I've read it.
after he died, and Mrs. Oxley had asked me if I would write the book, and she very graciously opened up his study, and every file that he had said there was no barrier. I could look at everything. He kept copies of every single letter that he sent to politicians and bishops and all these kinds of people. So there was a whole stack of material that I had, a lot of which went into that book, but I was able to use some of it for this book as well. A lot of documentation from his time as headmaster, because again, he kept all the newsletters he sent to parents. He kept his speeches on speech day and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of documentation in the first half of the book, less so in the second, because it's a different era and a different way of operating. And I think that's probably reflected in the book.
Just talk to us a little bit about, because there's going to be some ads in a minute, just memory photographs, but not being promoted for by Diet Coke or anything. But just talk to us a little bit about when you were talking to Rachel Oxley and to the Headley family. You must have been, I mean, you were head here for a very long time, but you were a teacher here for a long time. So much of your life was framed here. Did you have big flashback memories, and were they good ones?
I had some excellent memories from my time here. I was here for 30 years, the last 21 as headmaster. But when I first came, as you've alluded to, I was very impressed by the man, Charles Oxley. I very much appreciated his clarity on the Christian faith, high academic standards, and the all-round education of the pupil. He came across as, for many people, as perhaps a little bit austere.
Yes.
And in all his campaigning and so on, he was very, very forthright. But I saw a different side of him at times. I remember one occasion when I'd gone out, this was in my first term, I think, in the school. I was just any old teacher, English teacher. And I went out and got in my car and switched on the engine, and it was obvious that the exhaust system was cracked. And it had been before. So I came back into school, and I was looking for a boarder who could help me. And Mr. Oxley was there, and he said, "Oh, what's the problem?" I told him. He said, "Oh, I'll help you." I said, "I don't know. It means getting under the car. I'll help you." And we both scrabbled under the car on our backs, and he held the two bits of exhaust pipe together while I wrapped the wire round to hold it together.
Wow.
That was the man, you know.
Wow.
And this was not just a headmaster, he was a brilliant biblical scholar.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
He took his MA in biblical studies while he was headmastering. He gave me a copy of a very thick Bible commentary to which he had contributed. And some of the names in there were, the top people, F.F. Bruce, and people like that. And Charles Oxley was in there. He did the Book of Ruth, the commentary on the Book of Ruth.
I remember that, yes.
So he was of that order, that ranking, as a Bible scholar. And there he was, scrabbling in the dirt under my car, holding me. So I was very impressed by that.
Yeah.
A great man.
I think the prayer we have still for the opening of the school, I think, was Professor Bruce.
Yes.
We've got still in the blue room now at the school, in there is this sort of embroidered kind of wonderful kind of big, larger than A4 certainly, prayer dedication to school.
Yeah.
And when I saw it, I tried to recognize who wrote it. And of course, when I was at school, I was in Bruce's house. And so you always wonder where the houses came from. And now we have slightly different houses here. We have Fusion, Oxley, and Headley as well, and Raynor House, of course, here as well. But I do remember thinking about that and finding the books by Bruce, understanding why he was there. But that's still there, that plaque.
Wow.
So it's interesting.
And you've got this wonderful photograph inside your book, which is, because I used to wear it every day.
Yes.
Get beaten if I didn't, but... there were... Those were the days. Never did anybody any harm. Original blazer badge meant grace and knowledge.
Yeah.
Grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, from the book of 2 Peter. And my memory, and you were deputy head and then head, David, and obviously you're head now, Jeff, was that this was not, in a sense, you could have said this was a Christian school then, but it was very open to absolutely everybody.
Oh, yes.
And there wasn't an overburdening, as it were, Christian weight.
Right.
But there was like an oozing presence.
Yeah.
A nice one. That was the aroma.
Right.
How would you have described what you were trying to inculcate?
Well, I think I could best illustrate it by the way that the Oxleys founded a third school, Hamilton College,
Yes.
in near Glasgow,
Yes.
and the number of Muslim families who sent their children to his school,
Yes.
knowing it was very clear Christian foundation. And many of them said, well, it's because of respect for our daughters. They will be treated properly at your school. So it was all bound up. It wasn't just the faith, although the faith came across, hopefully in morning assembly and in scripture lessons, as they used to be called, but also in the way that people treated each other. And that really stood out for me at Hamilton College.
Yes.
Muslim families were very happy. We're happy for them to learn the Christian faith, but we want them there because our girls will be well looked after.
And how, for you now, Jeff,
Yep.
how do you retain this open spirit, yet strong dedication?
Interesting question. So I think when I first spoke about joining the school, this goes back probably my time and interviewed here to be the head. There's a story behind that as well, a different story in some ways, which I first wrote to the school to say, I noticed you need a new headmaster or headmistress. I'm open to help. And at that point, I had a different job elsewhere, and I was probably looking to go to probably a school in London at the time.
Yeah.
That was a place things were happening in education. Some might say, certainly. And eventually I ended up applying for the job. But long conversations with the directors, and particularly with Mike, and some key aspect about values is important. I think, I know speaking to David when writing the book first of all, and when Charles sort of came down the drive and saw the school, he must have had a vision for the school of what it would be to see that. And there is definitely that thread of a values-driven school that are sustained through the eras, even to now. And even when I stand up in here and I've got parents coming in for the first time on an open day, I start off saying, I need to let you know that we are a values-driven school. And some of you might not like that, but that's how we approach it. And so that sense of values, of openness, of encouraging students to explore faith as well is still part of the school, of all faiths really as well. But that's, before we came in today actually, it is slightly counterculture in some ways, and trying to find a space for them to see the grounds outside, to explore things, to reconnect with the family around the fire talking about things. And I know that Mike's family here is here right now, and we talk a lot about that, about Mike, about coming back to that sense of family and connection and sharing things together. And probably in this era, as opposed to when you were ahead, we have to battle things like the phones and the internet, and making sure that education for life and values isn't going to come from Google when they go through that. And that's a novel thing. And I recall distinctly that sense we must keep the values-driven education here, so that who you are as a person will make a difference, an impact on people. And we do have those conversations about what will you be, who you choose to be, and who do you choose to be in terms of your set of values. Because that will actually be transformational. That will make you stand out as a person.
Yes.
You may well get a wonderful degree, perhaps above a 2-2, potentially, as you go on.
I'll wait till
I'm not going to say it again, no. But I really, truly believe that when you stand up and you are somebody of value and you stand for something, you stand out.
Yes.
And so we do encourage that, to explore yourself, explore faith, to explore who you are as a person, to share that, to be confident. And that is sadly lacking in many areas of the world, and in some education institutions today, certainly.
I'll just tell a funny story. Well, so my dear brother, who was here, who you knew well, and so he's got 2 PhDs, and he lives in permanent academia, still at MIT, has never left, and constantly accuses me of having no career, because he says, "What have you done with your life?" I said, "Oh, Daniel, I'll give up." Anyway, so when the University of Kent very kindly said they were going to award me a Doctor of Law, I thought, oh, that's nice. So I told my brother, I sent him a WhatsApp, and he said, "You don't deserve it." I said, "Why? Why don't I deserve it?" He says, "You haven't written any essays." I said, "No, I haven't, but I've lived a life." And they noticed. And I think that's a wonderful thing, that a place like Scarisbrick Hall could allow you to be a super fast stream academic, or you could be a person of engagement. And that's what the values are all about.
It is, yeah. It is.
I'll tell you another quick story, only because you mentioned it. You mentioned about Hamilton College and the Muslims. So about 7 years ago, I got asked to go to Nigeria, to Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, and to drive for about 4 hours north and hand out certificates to Boko Haram terrorists in a prison, which is a wholly Islamic prison, just for the Boko Haram terrorist group. And so I said, "Oh, okay, what am I recognizing?" And they said, "Studies in Mark's Gospel." That the men, if they study Mark's Gospel, can have a certificate of recognition. Isn't that interesting? And they choose to do it.
Wow.
Willingly. So I got to meet a couple of hundred of them, and it was a wonderful experience. David, coming back to you, one of the things I discovered in here, by the way, I didn't know, you recorded in here, Charles Oxley had a rugby background.
He as a boy, he was at Cowley Grammar School, as it was. And Cowley Grammar School was probably the top rugby school in the country, certainly in the northwest. Cowley in St Helens, which is very much rugby territory. He played on the wing, apparently.
My recollection, but the other former pupils here might tell me I was deceived. My recollection is we were not allowed to play rugby here. Is that right? Not that I wanted to.
I don't think it was that you weren't allowed to. It was just that the majority feeling was we want football.
Yeah. I remember playing that uselessly, but I didn't realise that he had a rugby background. Actually.
Yeah.
That was a real wake-up moment in the book. I thought, what? I thought we were banned from it. When the school sort of lost its way after, you stayed, you became head when Charles obviously passed away.
No, I'd been head
before.
Yes. I joined the school in '68.
Yes.
When the school was 4 years old.
Wow.
I was teaching English, and then I was head of English, and then deputy head, while Charles was still operating. And it was 10 years after I became headmaster that he passed away, and Mrs. Oxley took over. Then she passed away, and Rachel took over. So I served under all three. They retained control of the business side of things, the finances and the buildings and everything. I just had the day-to-day running of the school.
And thank goodness for the Headley family who then picked the school up out of the ashes.
Yeah.
What was it like, that period of decay?
I was very much unaware of what was going on. Although I live in Southport, I only heard rumours, second-hand, even third-hand, of decline in numbers and standards. I had no way, I suppose I could have found out if I'd really wanted to, but I was invited to one event at the Floral Hall, and I think the Kingswood people wanted me to sit at the front, and I said, no, I don't want to sit at the front. I sat right at the back to observe, and they didn't invite me for anything else. So I was unaware for years, and it was quite a shock when I had a phone call one morning from Jeff Shaw.
Yes, I remember this one.
Who said, David, I wanted you to be one of the first people to know I've been appointed as headmaster of Scarisbrick Hall School. I said, oh dear, I'll pray for you.
That is a true story. I thought that wasn't quite the reaction I was expecting at that point in time, okay, on that side of it. But it was interesting, certainly, and I haven't forgotten it, you know.
Yeah.
But actually, when David did come back to school, when I was appointed headmaster sort of a few years afterwards, I remember you said, sorry for saying that in some ways. And actually, so from a headmaster to get an apology was quite something, actually. So that was quite remarkable.
It was because I was unaware of how things really were.
Yes.
But obviously they were at a pretty low ebb.
Yes.
When the Headley family came in, resurrection began.
Can I just hold Michael to account for one thing, actually? Because actually, I know you're chairing, but I thought I'd intervene.
Go ahead.
Because all the time in my time as head, and hearing stories from alumni that are here as well, the funniest stories tend to come from the boarding era.
Yes.
For some particular reason. And every time I meet the alumni, and they say, well, how's behaviour? I say, well, in our time we used to do this, and used to do this, and used to crawl over here and do this over here. And I think there were, whether they made the book or not, some interesting times in the boarding stories as well, which even you shared with me before, I'm pretty sure at some point, about bathtubs through the ceiling at one point, potentially.
Yeah.
And also people almost hiding away in lofts and attics, which I heard stories about.
Yes, I was never...
Was that Michael or not? I don't know.
No.
I was never involved in the boarding side. So a lot of these things were foreign to me as well. I had no idea what was going on. I heard rumours occasionally.
Yes.
But why don't you elucidate?
Well,
particularly the bathtub.
So I believe there's a story, and David may have heard the same story, which was there was a boarder having a bath in the bathhouse, which is now our sixth form common room, called the bathhouse, but it's still there. Unless said boarder is currently here tonight, in which case I'm quite worried about telling the story, but we'll see. Or please do correct me. And the staff room was sort of near the area as well, wasn't it, I think, roughly. But the story goes, I believe, that the bathing sixth form was flowing lots of hot water in the bath and enjoying himself clearly, and then suddenly there was a crack and the whole thing fell through the floor down beneath to be then seen by staff beneath at that point in time. That, of course, could be completely made up. I have no idea.
My version of it was that this gentleman, who was quite large in stature, filled the bath too full.
Yes.
And when he got in, the water lapped over and it dripped down into the staff room beneath.
Story's changed, isn't it, on that side of it?
Yes.
The first day. Oh. But you say he's here?
No,
Oh, not. Oh. I have, given that, I'll tell you one incident I remember. Now you've triggered it.
Okay.
I remember, but I can't remember who it was. Somebody had a fascination with putting cellophane across the toilet seats. so that when you sit down, anyway, never mind. There you go. But I remember that. I do remember that happening upstairs.
Really?
Yes. Did you feel, David, that everything you wanted to, as headmaster, everything you wanted to inculcate in the young men and women here, you felt went in, or was over the time, were they getting more resistant?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I think for those of little or no faith, some of them found the evangelical basis and the teaching perhaps a little oppressive. And there were certainly some who kicked against the pricks, as it were. I don't recall a strong opposition to it, though. It was an undercurrent, I would say, rather than outwardly visible.
Because you record here about the obituary of Charles Oxley's life that was in the Liverpool. Mary Whitehouse, quoted in the Liverpool Echo, said, "I'm deeply grieved at his death because he was a man of such immense courage. He showed a simple, uncomplicated commitment to the things he believed to be right and true." The leader column in the Liverpool Echo said every parent owes a debt to Charles Oxley in the Merseyside Law and Order campaign. And Mr. Oxley was uncompromising in his views,
Yes.
some of which were considered extreme, even by those who agreed with him on other matters. But he did more than most of us to expose evil and to cause us to think about the way in which society is moving. Do you feel he was extreme or prophetic?
Depends where you're starting from. Certainly prophetic, but he was involved, he told me on one occasion, he was involved in 36 campaigns, crusades, committees, all about law and order, about the deterioration of standards in society, Christianity being marginalized, etc., etc. So he was always writing, as I said before, to bishops and to MPs and all kinds of people like that. So from that point of view, some would regard him as extreme. He saw things very much in black and white terms. And if you didn't agree with him, hard luck. I think in a sense, anyone who is decisive in that sort of way is going to be divisive. He's not saying, come and let's talk through these things. He was saying, no, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, that is bad. There's the dividing line.
How do you feel about that now in 2024?
Interesting. I think I've had a couple of conversations in the past with David about, if we were here in 2025 with Charles Oxley currently as a headmaster, how would he cope in the current society that we have right now?
Yes.
I think it'd be interesting. Okay, undoubtedly. I think he'd probably still be unswervingly black and white as it goes through. One thing I do recognise, though, is that he probably had the foresight to see how society was deteriorating. And maybe he had to feel as though I've got to stand for something, in that sense of being a standard bearer. I think the way the world is right now, that's a hard place to be, because you have to have this sort of act of understanding and compassion and seeing both sides and debating and going through it. So it'd be a very interesting school if he was here as headmaster right now. And I think it would be a challenging place to be as well for him. And it may not fit the current society. But when I say about his view of sort of seeing society, I know that he, from reading the book and talking to people as well, that, he saw morality declining as well. And he had a deep concern about that. And I know a lot of the board has mentioned it as well, about inappropriate magazines appearing in kind of newsagents that shouldn't do and that kind of side of it, and he would have stood up for that. And I remember you've told me a time when you did about listening to the TV or the wireless and writing down what was inappropriate about it. Is that right? I think as an act, so he knew what was going on. And to some extent, society has deteriorated in some ways away from values. That might sound controversial, but it's something that we can see happening, and a sense of what do we stand for. And in some ways, it's very hard to find people that stand for something now. Everybody wants to be sort of across different areas and different factors. So there's an admiration for him because he absolutely stood on the line. And the book called Standard Bearer stands for it. And and we do talk to pupils now about, well, you're in Oxley House. Do you know what that means? Do you know who this person was? And we pass it on through the house system, saying that the book talks about him being a standard bearer. Do you know what that means? And we talk about the Roman armies and the standard bearers and how it is and how it goes. And no, it means you when you stand for something, you stand for something. You might get a bit of it might burn sometimes when you hit that coal face and it burns against you, but you stay firm and you stand for it. I was speaking to Mike Headley, about how you deal with challenging times in business and moving forward as well. And I think one connection I'd say there particularly is, Mike had a set of values that he stood by, and he stood by it. There was times when he talked to me about challenging times when you go forward and you're almost like swimming across a long river or a lake. Okay, and sometimes you just got to keep going, and you keep swimming, and you don't look around and you sink, and you don't panic in that moment, but you just keep going, you keep driving forward, and in doing so, you get to that goal. So I see a standard bearer in the history of the school. I see a visionary determination that a school needs to have a set of values and stand for something. And I see that overlap of the original Charles Oxley vision coming through the gates about this school's got to stand for something. And you look at the tower and you think, okay, there's a beacon there. What does it stand for? What does it represent? And it's got to mean something.
Yes. You record in here, David, that you say Scarisbrick Court Education in the 2020s uses the acronym RIVER.
Okay. Resilience,
Independence, Values, Exploration, and Reflection. And would you have felt that was the same in your era?
I think it was a different approach. I think the present setup is taking the whole child and all the different aspects of life, whereas in the Oxley era, it was very much academic focus, plus other things, but the academic came first. I think that's how I would sum it.
The values thread is still robust, isn't it? And very strong.
So. Yeah.
I think it's the heart of it. You know? And obviously I was at Scarisbrick Hall under Headmaster David Raynor in Bruce House, and you feel that sense of it matters. Who you are, what you stand for, what you do, it can make a difference. And I think the philosophy we have right now as values being there opens conversations about why values.
Yes.
Okay, why is it important in the centre of that philosophy to have values there? And I think that's a key one. Why exploration, I guess, as well.
Yes.
That's a different conversation.
It is.
Stepping out and finding things and finding your way through.
Yes.
And we want pupils here, students here, alumni go on beyond here that will take some risks in life with your core set of values, and talking away about having a compass. Something to come back to relate to when you make decisions.
Yeah.
So in the light of this choice, where do I sit in my heart? Where do I focus in that conversation? And I know that Mike carried a compass with him as well, with that view of saying you've got to at some point balance and check what you're doing. Otherwise you can get carried away on a path influenced by other things and directions until you stop and think and reflect and go, where should I be right now? What am I doing?
It's interesting, you give this wonderful paragraph about Mike Headley in page 124. The Headleys were business people, you write, not educationalists, so they sought help from people who could advise them as to the state of things in the school, members of the trust who would visit the school every 3 months had the impression that numbers and standards were being maintained. Mike Headley asked 3 of his friends who were head teachers to have a good look at the school and to ask some searching questions. What they found was quite alarming. What was that?
It was a decline, I understand, of academic standards, of behaviour standards, of just the appearance of the place. You know, the grounds, I think I used the phrase, turning into a jungle.
Yeah.
As I say, I wasn't aware of all this. I've received that information from elsewhere, but I've no doubt that it was true. Things were in a very parlous state when the Headley family came on board.
Were you surprised at the depth and extent of their investment?
I've been absolutely astounded. I mean, I don't know the actual numbers, but I know they're big numbers. When you look at the tower, I do know the numbers involved in the tower, and I've no idea what it would cost to build this place. But it's just staggering. When you think how some people spend huge amounts of money, they buy a yacht in Monte Carlo, they travel the world.
He's talking about you.
Yeah. If you know, he definitely not on that side.
But these lovely Headley people have chosen to invest time, money, experience, effort into a school. In other words, into hundreds of young people's lives. And they deserve very great credit for that.
I think that's a striking comment. And I know we're going to talk after the interval a bit more about that side of it. And you actually got a chance to do some questions as well. There's a question box outside for the interval. And we'll get vetted, though, to warn other ex-students on that side of it. You're right. I think David's quite right, because although I wasn't here for the takeover period, I will say a couple of things that are really important actually there is there was a difficult time when there's still the merger going on. However, we wouldn't be here today had that team not kept the school going. That's
true.
It's not often recognised on that side of it. But the job that was done there was probably one of the most difficult ones that you could possibly imagine, because there were multiple promises made by multiple large companies, but somebody had to steer that ship through there. So I know there was difficult times, but steering a ship without fuel and surviving it through to be able to be in this theatre right now is extraordinary. And those hard times are so difficult, but you know, I take my hat off to the staff there, to Eric that was there at the time as well, to achieve what was almost impossible, to survive that through, to steer that ship through, and it was remarkable to go through. It's not for this book to go into that, because we haven't covered that era really, but it was incredible. And I think the pictures that I saw, I think Mike had a camera and took pictures of the grounds when they came in, after all those false promises of the companies that tried to invest and didn't invest in the school. And you're absolutely right, the word jungle was a literary term here in some ways. What was going on, there was a physical jungle out there. You couldn't get through Lady Anne's garden. You could barely get to the school on that side of it. So they had to literally, and I think it was the family members themselves, the Headley family, hands-on, starting to peel away this shell of damage and what was going on to reveal what was left behind it.
Yes.
And then to have the ability to then decide to go and invest in that. And I'm sure Linda's here, Mike's wife, probably could have had a very comfortable life, retiring after working exceptionally hard, working in care and having really successful businesses. I don't know how you go, folks, we've worked incredibly hard all our lives to do something, and we've got some assets to live off. I know, let's go and sort this school out and do this from here, take a deep breath, here we go again. And I think that's absolutely breathtaking to do that. It really is. Is it time for a break? Or is it? Yeah.
So we're going to pause for 10 minutes for whatever. If you feel you need to whatever, then please do. For 10 minutes, please be tough and tight so we can take some questions.
Or if not, John will sort you out.
John will, definitely. Definitely. Aim to be back before 8 o'clock, 5 to 8.